Why modern life is making you spiritually numb? What if I told you that spiritual numbness isn't a crisis of faith? It's a predictable neurological response to environments that systematically suppress the brain states associated with transcendence, awe, and connection to something beyond yourself. Your brain has specific networks dedicated to self-transcendent experiences moments. When your sense of individual self dissolves into connection with something larger, modern life systematically blocks these networks through constant stimulation, individualistic focus, and absence of the specific environmental conditions that trigger transcendent states. This isn't religious conversion nonsense. This is hard science. Neuroscientists at Yale, UC Berkeley, and Johns Hopkins have documented the precise neural correlates of spiritual experience decreased activity in the default mode network. Your self-referential thinking, increased activity in parietal regions, boundary dissolution, and elevated dopamine and serotonin. These states aren't mysterious, they're measurable brain configurations that modern environments actively prevent. Ancient spiritual traditions from monastic contemplation to shamanic ritual to mystical practice accidentally engineered environments that reliably triggered these brain states. They called it enlightenment, communion, or unity consciousness. Neuroscience reveals they were accessing specific neurological configurations. You're not spiritually deficient. Your environment is spiritually toxic. I'm about to expose 10 mechanisms of modern life that systematically suppress transcendent brain states. Each technique reveals how contemporary existence blocks the neural pathways to awe, meaning, and connection, and provides specific interventions to restore them. Your spiritual numbness has a cause. Time to address it. Part 1. The constant stimulation suppression. You're never bored, never understimulated, never in true sensory silence. Spiritual experience requires specific low stimulation states that constant input prevents. Neuroscientist Andrew Newberg's research on meditation and prayer shows that transcendent experiences emerge when the brain's orientation circuits quiet, specifically when the constant stream of external input stops and attention turns inward. Perpetual stimulation prevents this essential disengagement. This is technique number 1 out of 10, the constant stimulation suppression. For 30 consecutive days, create daily 60-minute technology-free, stimulus-free windows. No phone, music, podcasts, reading, or conversation. Sit in natural environments or quiet rooms, engaging in nothing, walking slowly, sitting still, or gentle repetitive activity like washing dishes. Allow boredom. Resist all urges to fill the void. Document what emerges in the silence weekly. Your default mode network, the brain's self-referential narration system, operates continuously. When fed external input, silence allows this network to quiet, creating space for transcendent states where self-boundaries soften. You're removing the constant noise that drowns out subtlest spiritual signals. Studies on sensory deprivation show that reduced input increases mystical experiences. The brain needs quiet to access transcendent states. Start implementing stimulus-free windows and watch spiritual sensitivity return as your brain escapes constant noise that blocks transcendent circuitry. Part 2. The individualism isolation effect. Modern culture celebrates radical individualism. Spiritual experience requires dissolving the boundaries between self and other. Exactly what individualistic conditioning prevents. Psychologist Dacher Keltner's research on awe demonstrates that self-transcendent experiences require small self-states moments. When your individual significance diminishes in the presence of something vast, individualistic cultures that glorify the self make these states inaccessible. This is technique number 2 out of 10, the individualism isolation effect. Weekly for 12 consecutive weeks. Deliberately engage in experiences designed to shrink your sense of self-importance. Visit vast natural landscapes, contemplate astronomical scales, study ancient civilizations' time frames, or participate in group activities where you're one small part of a larger whole. Spend minimum 2 hours weekly in small self-contexts. Journal afterward on how your sense of individual significance shifted. Your parietal cortex creates boundaries between self and world. Our experiences temporarily reduce this boundary making, allowing connection to something larger. You're deliberately seeking experiences that override individualistic programming and activate self-transcendent circuits. Research shows that our experiences increase prosocial behavior and life satisfaction. Temporary self-dissolution creates lasting well-being. Start seeking small self-experiences weekly and watch spiritual numbness dissolve. as self-boundaries soften through repeated transcendent exposure. Part 3. The nature deprivation syndrome. May you spend 93% of your life indoors or in vehicles. Human brains evolved in natural environments. They require specific natural inputs for optimal spiritual functioning. Environmental psychologist Rachel Kaplan's research demonstrates that natural environments uniquely restore depleted attention and facilitate experiences of wonder. Biophilia theory suggests humans have innate needs for nature connection that urban environments cannot satisfy. This is technique number 3 out of 10, the nature deprivation syndrome. Daily for 50 consecutive days, spend minimum 30 minutes in genuine natural environments, forests, beaches, mountains, deserts, or parks with minimal human infrastructure. No devices, engage all senses, notice smells, sounds, textures, patterns. Sit still for at least 10 of those 30 minutes, simply observing natural processes. Track your subjective sense of connection and aliveness weekly. Natural environments activate parasympathetic nervous system responses and reduce default mode network activity, the exact conditions facilitating spiritual states. Artificial environments maintain stress responses that block transcendence. You're providing your brain the environmental inputs it evolved to require for spiritual functioning. Studies show that time in nature correlates with reported spiritual experiences and sense of meaning. The natural world triggers transcendent circuitry. Start daily nature immersion and watch spiritual sensitivity reawaken as your brain receives the environmental inputs modern life denies. Part 4. The speed acceleration barrier. Everything in modern life operates at unnatural speeds. Spiritual experience requires slowness, contemplative pacing that your hurried existence prevents. Psychologist Guy Claxton's research on slow thinking demonstrates that insight, creativity, and spiritual awareness emerge from slow mental processes that rushed living suppresses. Your brain has fast systems, immediate reaction, and slow systems, contemplative depth. Modern pace engages only the former. This is technique number 4 out of 10, the speed acceleration barrier. For 40 consecutive days, deliberately practice extreme slowness in one daily activity. Eat one meal taking 45 minutes minimum, chewing each bite 30 times. Walk one route at half your normal pace, noticing everything. Wash dishes in ultra slow motion, feeling every sensation. Choose one activity and make slowness a daily meditation. Notice what emerges when speed disappears. Rushing activates sympathetic nervous system and keeps you in surface level processing. Intentional slowness engages parasympathetic systems and allows depth, a prerequisite for spiritual states. You're training your nervous system that safety exists in slowness, opening doors that speed keeps locked. Contemplative traditions universally emphasize deliberate slowness. Hasty practice prevents the depth where spiritual experience lives. Start practicing radical slowness daily and watch spiritual numbness recede as deceleration allows access to contemplative depth. Part 5. The meaning-making atrophy. Consume information, but never process it into wisdom. Spiritual life requires meaning-making reflective integration that transforms experience into understanding. Psychologist Dan McAdams' research on narrative identity shows that humans need to construct coherent meaning from life experiences. Without reflection, experiences remain disconnected data points that generate no transcendent significance. This is technique number 5 out of 10, the meaning-making atrophy. Every evening for 75 consecutive days, spend 20 minutes in reflective writing. What did today mean? What patterns am I noticing in my life? What is life teaching me? Write by hand in a dedicated journal. Don't rush to answers. Explore questions monthly. Review all entries looking for emerging themes and insights that reveal larger patterns. Your brain's default mode network processes and integrates experiences into coherent narrative. Constant external focus prevents this integration. You're creating dedicated time for meaning, making the cognitive process that transforms mundane experience into spiritual significance. Studies on expressive writing show it increases sense of meaning and life coherence. Reflection transforms experience into wisdom. Start nightly meaning-making practice and watch spiritual depth return as you process life, rather than merely experiencing it. Part 6. The community dissolution. Are socially connected but communally isolated. Spiritual traditions universally emphasize community shared practice. Creates experiences individual effort cannot. Sociologist Emile Durkheim's concept of collective effervescence describes the transcendent states that emerge from group ritual, Neuroscience confirms that synchronized group activity creates brain states unavailable to isolated individuals. This is technique number 6 out of 10, the community dissolution crisis. Within 30 days, find or create a community of practice meditation group, contemplative church, philosophical discussion circle, or intentional gathering focused on meaning making. Commit to attending weekly for 6 consecutive months minimum. The specific tradition matters less than consistency and authentic engagement. Document how group participation affects your individual spiritual sensitivity. Synchronized activity chanting, group meditation. Collective ritual creates neural synchrony across participants' brains. This interpersonal resonance facilitates transcendent states impossible alone. You're accessing the communal dimension of spirituality that individualism is severed. Research on group meditation shows enhanced brain coherence and deeper states than solo practice. Community amplifies individual capacity. Start participating in spiritual community and watch your individual practice deepen through collective resonance that isolation prevents. Part 7. The disembodied cognition trap. You live entirely in your head. Spiritual experience requires embodied awareness, conscious integration of physical sensation that pure cognition blocks. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's work on embodied cognition demonstrates that consciousness emerges from body-brain integration, not brain alone. Spiritual traditions emphasize body-based practices because transcendence requires integration, not dissociation. This is technique number 7 out of 10, the disembodied cognition trap. Daily for 60 consecutive days. Practice embodied awareness for 15 minutes. Yoga, Tai Chi, walking meditation, conscious dance, or slow movement with complete attention to physical sensation. Focus entirely on body experience, muscle engagement, breath rhythm, balance, temperature. When mind wanders to thoughts, return attention to sensation. Track how your sense of presence and aliveness shifts over time. Spiritual experiences involve changes in bodily awareness, boundary dissolution, energy sensations, altered perception. Pure mental practice cannot access these somatic dimensions. You're reconnecting consciousness with body, creating the integrated awareness where transcendence occurs. Studies on body-based practices show they trigger spiritual experiences more reliably than purely mental techniques. Transcendence requires embodiment. Start daily embodied practice and watch spiritual sensitivity increase as consciousness reintegrates with the body. Modern life taught you to ignore. Part 8. The sacred absence problem. Nothing in modern life is sacred. Spirituality requires the category of sacred experiences, places, or practices set apart as special and worthy of reverence. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade's work on sacred and profane demonstrates that humans need sacred categories to access spiritual dimensions. When everything is ordinary, nothing triggers transcendent response. This is technique number 8 out of 10, the sacred absence problem. Deliberately create sacred elements in your life. Designate one space in your home as sacred, used only for contemplative practice. Maintained with intention, entered with ritual respect. Establish one weekly practice as sacred, protected time treated with ceremonial significance. Create personal rituals marking transitions, lighting candles, intentional silence, specific movements. Maintain these sacred designations for 90 consecutive days. Your brain responds to contextual cues, environments, and activities designated as sacred trigger different neural patterns than ordinary contexts. Sacred categories prime your nervous system for transcendent states. You're reintroducing the sacred, profane distinction that modern secularism eliminated. Research shows that sacred spaces and practices enhance spiritual experiences. Designation itself alters neurological response. Start creating sacred categories deliberately and watch spiritual numbness fade as designated sacredness primes transcendent brain states. Part 9. The death denial. Avoidance. Modern culture systematically avoids death awareness. Spiritual depth requires contemplating mortality, that existential confrontation that generates ultimate meaning. Psychologist Irvin Yalom's work on existential psychotherapy demonstrates that death awareness, when properly processed, enhances life appreciation and meaning. Terror management theory shows that mortality awareness shapes values and behavior profoundly. This is technique number 9 out of 10, the death denial avoidance. Once weekly for 16 consecutive weeks. Engage in deliberate mortality contemplation, visit cemeteries and read headstones. Reflecting on finished lives. Write your own obituary as you'd want it read. Imagine your final day vividly. Calculate days remaining if you live to 80. Contemplate. What matters if life is finite? How should I live knowing death is certain? Journal your reflections for 30 minutes weekly. Death awareness activates what psychologists call existential mode, a state of heightened meaning sensitivity and value clarity. Modern death denial keeps you in trivial mode, concerned with ultimately meaningless pursuits. You're using mortality awareness to access the existential depth modern culture systematically avoids. Studies show that death contemplation increases prosocial behavior and value aligned. Living mortality awareness catalyzes spiritual depth. Start weekly mortality contemplation and watch trivial concerns diminish as death. Awareness restores existential priority and spiritual seriousness. Part 10. The transcendent practice deficiency here. That's something that will blow your mind. You've never actually practiced any spiritual technique consistently enough for it to work. Spiritual states require sustained practice months or years, not days or weeks. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson's research on meditation shows that significant brain changes require 10,000 plus hours of practice. Spiritual numbness often reflects insufficient practice, not spiritual incapacity. This is technique number 10 out of 10, the transcendent practice deficiency. Choose one specific contemplative practice: meditation, contemplative prayer, mindfulness, breath work, or visualization. Commit to 30 minutes daily for 365 consecutive days without exception. Track practice completion on a visible calendar. When experiencing doubt or boredom, persist anyway. After 1 year, assess your spiritual sensitivity honestly compared to day 1. If committed to continuing, extend to year 2. Neural pathways strengthened through repetition. Spiritual capacities are no different. Brief experimentation cannot produce the sustained neural changes that create reliable access to transcendent states. You're committing to the sustained practice. Modern culture's impatience prevents long-term. Practitioners show permanent brain changes absent in short-term. Practitioners' duration and consistency matter more than technique. Start a genuine sustained practice and watch spiritual capacity develop as accumulated. Repetition creates the neural infrastructure that brief experimentation cannot build. Closing these 10 mechanisms aren't separate problems. They're an integrated system of modern conditions that systematically suppress the neural and psychological prerequisites for spiritual experience. You're not spiritually deficient. You're spiritually deprived by environmental conditions that prevent transcendent states. Constant stimulation suppression blocks the quiet transcendence requires. Individualism isolation effect prevents self-dissolution. Nature deprivation syndrome removes essential natural inputs. Speed acceleration barrier eliminates contemplative slowness. Meaning-making atrophy prevents reflective integration. Community dissolution crisis removes collective resonance. Disembodied cognition trap creates mental-physical split. Sacred absence problem eliminates transcendent categories. Death denial avoidance suppresses existential depth. Transcendent practice deficiency reflects insufficient commitment. Ancient spiritual traditions understood these requirements intuitively. They engineered environments and practices addressing every dimension: communal ritual, natural settings, contemplative slowness, embodied practice, sacred spaces, death meditation, and sustained commitment. They knew empirically what neuroscience now explains mechanistically. Modern life isn't just spiritually neutral, it's actively spiritually suppressive. Every modern condition systematically blocks the prerequisites for transcendent experience. Constant stimulation, radical individualism, nature absence, perpetual speed, isolation, disembodiment, profane existence, death denial, and practice deficiency each alone would impair spiritual capacity. Together, they create comprehensive spiritual numbness. Your transformation doesn't start tomorrow or next week. It starts the moment you create your first stimulus-free hour. It starts when you seek your first small self-experience in nature. It starts when you commit to your 365-day practice. The version of you with restored spiritual sensitivity emerges when you systematically address the environmental and behavioral conditions modern life imposed. Spiritual capacity isn't mystical, it's neurological, and it requires specific conditions. Your future self is waiting with spiritual aliveness that seems impossible from your current numbness, but becomes inevitable when you restore the conditions transcendence requires.